Hello, and welcome to episode 95 of the Following Mechanical Turks project. So we're kind of in the thick of trying to structure the third product, research product, looking at the theoretical operations, or I suppose I should say how Mechanical Turk itself theorizes the concepts that
Hmm.
it's entangled with, the human intelligence, those kinds of things. So we've been dealing with this for a while. We do have this outline sketched, but we were kind of discussing ways to approach this by ourselves enacting a kind of mechanical Turk by getting others to contribute to this,
Hmm.
which means, what kind of tasks, what kind of human intelligence tasks are we asking them to do? How are we, uh, reaching people? How are we compensating them, I suppose? So that's, one thing, but then also related to what are we asking them to do? It's like what's the thesis of this work? What question is it in? Yeah, I suppose what's its research question that it's interrogating here?
Hmm.
So it's kind of where we are. Um, and so for today, one thing we want to look at is, what tasks would you imagine asking folks? How would you go about doing that? What's going to be useful? Because we sort of have a spectrum here ranging from the sort of uh, very low level recognition tasks, or perhaps a little bit further up, summary tasks to other things. Um, Nathaniel, I sent you something that I thought might be useful. It aligns with our uh, I'm trying to find it here. It aligns with our outline. Let me share it here. So, this is an interview that I think was just posted yesterday, um, with Margaret Mitchell, who
Hmm.
is kind of notable for being an employee of Google, dealing with ethics and AI, who was let go from that position. I suppose the narratives around that are complicated, like narratives often are. It did seem to correlate with a paper that her team released that perhaps presented some complications for Google's ambitions. And
Hmm.
so, whether or not that was causal, who could say? This interview I thought was useful because a large portion of it, I can kind of just pull that up, I suppose, um, is her discussing definitionally, like we don't really have a functional definition of what artificial general intelligence is, right?
Right.
The acronym is AGI. No, excuse me, the initialism is AGI. Those are two separate things. Um, and she points out, it's like we can't really determine, are we making progress to that? I mean, it's kind of, there's a certainly a degree of hype cycle going along with this. It's like, are we getting closer to AGI? And she's pointing out, I think fairly reasonably, it's like, well, we don't really, let alone have a firm definition of what that would entail, right?
Right.
What is AGI? So how can you tell if you're getting closer to it? But then she moves on, right? She says, AGI is essentially narrative, just the term intelligence is not a term that has consensus on what it means, right? So she's like, not only is AGI, it's dependent on the definitions of concepts that we don't really have a firm shared clarity on. So she points
Hmm.
out intelligence in a lot of
Right.
different scenarios means a lot of different things, right? And she points out the potential, its use as a kind of, as she says here, a segregationist force, right?
Hmm.
And we see this with kind of goalpost moving, but then also, the use of things like intelligence tests to
Right.
striate populations. Whoa, whoa, whoa! not even. Um, but then also she says, and then we can look at the term general, right? General is also a term that within the context of AI doesn't have a very clear meaning. So you can think about it just in terms of every day. If you have general knowledge about something, what does that mean? It means you know about maths, science, English. I might say I have general intelligence, but that I don't know anything about medicine, for example.
Right.
And so if I were a technology that is going to be used everywhere, I think it's very clear to know, okay, I can help you edit your essay, but I cannot do a surgery. So she contests the definitions of intelligence. Well, she doesn't contest them. She points out that we don't really have fixed definitions of intelligence in general. However, she does not. So she contests or reveals
Right.
our inability to make determinations about progress toward AGI by revealing that AGI itself is, you know, I mean, it's sort of a deconstructive way. It's like it's resting on concepts that aren't themselves stable, right? It's all just sort of self-referential. And then she pulls apart general and intelligence. She leaves aside, and
Yeah.
this to me is the real crux of this. She doesn't take on artificial. That's the
Yeah.
one where it's like, well, everybody knows, and she doesn't say this, it just doesn't come up
Yeah.
because it's
That's,
paradigmatic, right? Where it's like, well,
yeah.
everyone knows what artifice is, but let's contest the other two terms in this three-term initialism, right? To me, that's just perfect because it's
Yeah.
like, this is somebody who um, is notable in this area. And I mean, people could and do, of course, in part because she's a woman, contest her status, but she's a notable figure in this area. That seems incontestable. And like, this is sort of a really good entry where it's like, we're not stable on these concepts. And, the ones she identifies are intelligence in general, but leaves unsaid, but artificial is fine. I mean, it's like that's the
Yeah.
perfect door opening for us to say, well, yes, but artifice also
Well,
is not resolved.
and I think we would, and I think what's additionally I think compelling about it is we wouldn't just be, calling someone out for, well, you didn't do the third term, because we'd also be
Right.
making, but part of your struggle with the first two is because you're not recognizing what the third one does for all of them,
Yeah.
right? The idea of what would help you understand intelligence. I mean, given the way that we've been approaching artificial, what do you mean by general intelligence? Well, that's in reference to, well, whatever intelligence is in the context of a given taskscape or artifice,
Yeah.
right?
Right. I mean,
That's it's not just a term. It's revealing that she doesn't define it because it just seems, as you pointed out, paradigmatic. But not defining it is to not just, right. It's not, we're not just calling you out because we'd like you to do all three, right? Because we're completionists and we like symmetry. It's that not engaging artifice is what makes having the conversation about general intelligence, right? Because
yeah.
what she's pushing against is, I don't know how to define these absent of a specific context. Well,
Yes.
that's what
It's
that's what
artifice.
we mean by artifice, right? Like, what's the thing in which intelligence comes to be a particular manifestation or iteration of it?
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I agree. It's like this isn't finger wagging that it's like
No.
you missed one. It's like here's how we can contribute, which is the difficulty we as a people have trying to resolve those questions are because we're trying to do them in abstractions,
Yes.
We're
We're
trying to deal with, well, what is intelligence? And it's like that's an empty question. You can pursue that if you want. I'm not saying you can't, but you're
right,
not
but
going to you're not going to find an
or
answer.
or you could say that from a rhetorical standpoint, we have plenty of precise definitions of intelligence in general.
But they're not
We just don't
trans
have we don't have an essentializing singular
A1,
definition of that,
right?
which he takes to mean we haven't. We have, but that we is many, right?
Yeah.
There's there's lots of workable definitions of intelligence. we don't have one that we all agree upon, or one that we can, or one that stands outside of agreement, right?
Well, and potentially that's how we can see these working with and against each other because the concept of general intelligence feels like you're trying to escape the problem of a situated intelligence. I mean, the
Right,
example she uses exactly where she's like, but I don't know anything about medicine, but I can help you edit your paper. It's because we want to have an abstract, this is what intelligence is. That's what general intelligence is. Well, what is a general intelligence? It's like, well, I don't know if that's possible. I mean, if what you're talking about then is just Catholic or comprehensive intelligence, knowledge about everything. Is that general intelligence? I mean,
right.
it's like,
Then that seems to be right. That seems to be a lot of intelligence as opposed to general intelligence, right? Like,
yeah,
no, no, I know everything. Well, that's not general anymore. That's just you
right,
know everything. Also, some might argue intelligence has nothing to do with knowing stuff at
right.
all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to her credit in this piece, she alludes to that by talking about
Yeah,
like, well, different disciplines, right? I mean, it's like if you want this as a philosophical, that's going to be different than someone who deals with intelligence as a more kind of tangible problem solving, right?
right.
Kind of related to that. Let me see if I have this other one here. Yeah. Um, so related to that was this piece that just popped up recently as well. A radical new proposal for how mind emerges from matter. And
Mhm.
this talks particularly about the diff the difficulties and the sort of turf wars about like the definition of what's intelligent to some keeps expanding and expanding where it's like, oh yes, well plants,
Right,
there's
right.
a book now where like, okay, so plants are all connected, so they're intelligent. And then there are other figures, of course, who say, no, if you don't have a brain, like that's in this piece. If you don't have
Interesting.
a brain, you can't be intelligent because a brain is necessary for intelligence. If you don't have a brain, you can still do these things, but it's different. It's a different act, right?
Yeah,
Or a different thing. So this piece is kind of interesting because it's dealing with precisely that, and it gets into this notion of how do we define intelligence? Is it, accomplishment of a goal, or, is it something related to is it an evolutionary mechanism, right? It's
right.
just a means to push genes further into the future, right? I mean, it's like in this piece because some of it deals with like, I'm a plant biologist, so this is how I'm defining it, right? And
Right,
either, heliotropism does or doesn't fit that, right?
right.
Um, so anywho, there were a
Yeah.
couple of those. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, back to this piece too, it's yeah, I mean again, I'm not psychoanalyzing the author, but there's a sense in which, right, that the term what artificial does in that context, it also works against the notion of general intelligence.
Yeah,
Like it spells trouble for the notion of general intelligence. Yeah, I mean, in many ways, you can't really define it because artificial general intelligence is oxymoronic, right? Like in that sense, they don't artifice in general aren't don't work well in that context because
yeah,
general is trying to escape a particular artifice to describe intelligence in general. And what artifice is a constant reminder of is that no, it's only within this artifice that
a
you can.
construct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
and I mean, we've butted up against the position that, well, every act of intelligence, probably no matter how defined, involves artifice, involves construction, involves parameters, right?
mhm,
It is interesting to me, in fact, that the kind of standardized initialism now is AGI. It's artificial general intelligence rather than general artificial
artificial
intelligence.
intelligence. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much to dig into that, but it's like where that qualifier goes because normally we call it
Yeah.
AI. why has the AI been split up? Is
Yeah.
general intelligence
Yeah.
separate from intelligence?
Like it's intervening somehow.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting that it is split
Yeah.
up that way rather than keeping the established AI pattern, you know? Anywho, stuff to
Yeah,
chew on.
because yeah, because it strikes. Yeah, it is interesting. I don't have any immediate thoughts. I thought I did, but there was nothing there. Um, yeah, so maybe that's. I don't know. I mean, it's yeah. Clearly, this is inroads for us. I'm wondering even how it relates to possible rhetorical intelligence tasks.
Well, so I was thinking about that because, last time we talked, we were sort of unresolved about like, should these be, because I remember you brought up, it's like, should these just be like summary tasks? Should these just
Yeah.
be like very, as we've seen before, and there's problems with invoking hierarchies, but things that are compensated differently, that call upon different expertise or whatever than more interpretive acts, right? I mean, like we saw these kind of ranges of is there a dog in this picture or isn't there or whatever,
Mhm.
potentially into things like summary and then making kinds of judgment calls. Like we even had
Yeah.
folks kind of making those sorts of calls that if you wanted to put them into a hierarchy, we could definitely do that. Where it's like, well, is there a dog here or not? Summarize this paragraph. Now, what do you think this paragraph says about their relationship? Right? I mean, it's like we could hierarchize that if we want. And the more I was looking at this, because we even had sort of issues in terms of like, do we want to allow them to use chatbots? It's like,
Right.
and even and if you don't, how do you prevent it, right?
Hmm.
And so in thinking about this, like for me, I was moving away from those like tasks of summary because I was like, well, in looking at the outline and thinking about this more, I was like, if this is a rhetoric mechanical Turk, it's like, what do we contribute here, right?
Yeah.
And the outline does allude to that, or maybe even just outright states it, where it talks about readability, right?
Yeah. Yep.
It says, embedded in all this is the pejorative artificial. It talks about that. But people, I guess like us, but also Tenon from Literary Theory for Robots,
Yeah.
sees intelligence as necessarily artificial. This is where rhetoric comes in because we don't fear the artificial. Everything partakes in artifice, so forth and so on. Saturation and discursive artifice, that's our thing. What can we contribute then is analysis of instantiations of discursive artifice. What's being constructed? Upon what ethics does it rest? What are its probable effects? How can it be differently articulated? That's rhetorical reading. So I was looking at that
Yeah.
and I was like, potentially that would be a way to go. So like, the questions or the schema I was thinking of is potentially we identify a range of like cases or situations. We've already touched upon the one of like the student who feels compelled to write in order to please,
Yeah.
right? A thing. I just saw one yesterday, although these things they're already there about in fact what was this Delvish, yeah, the discussion of Delvish where certain phrases have started to kind of like back populate, and there was just something I was reading either this morning or yesterday about this kind of structure that I haven't noticed much, but now I'm going to be looking for it, which means I'll see it. Now I've got a hammer.
Right.
And it apparently chatbots are prone to saying it's not X, it's Y. So they use this structure a lot where it's like, it's not challenging, it's insulting. And I was like,
Mm.
huh, I haven't seen that a lot. And the context of this write-up was a lot of faculty seeing that structure in student writing, even in scenarios where it wasn't being written by a chatbot, where it's just become it's just soaked into their usage, where it's like it's
Right.
not
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
it's which happens, of course. I mean, it cross-pollinates. And so, I was like, maybe what I could do is go through some of these cases, and we already have a bank of them on another document. But I was like, we'd have to select a limited number. Now, that doesn't mean they couldn't have like multiple artifacts associated with them, right? It's like more than one news story or whatever, although that might be taxing to people's patience, whatever. But it's
Yeah.
like a few different choices of things like that, scenarios that seem relevant to the kinds of things we want to interrogate. And then potentially then ask them questions about the artifice as they see it there, right? Like, what is the artifice involved in this scenario? What are its groundings,
Yeah.
its effect? How would you, and I put a question to myself, I was like, do you need to define artifice in advance? And I was like, probably not. Probably you don't want to say, this
That
is
was
what we're calling artificial,
that
because
was
then
one of
that,
my questions, and maybe I can drop this in here too, is as I was thinking through this and writing up some notes that um yeah, how much, I guess maybe the
timing,
question of how much do we put our thumb on the scale?
right.
But I'm also thinking too that like a note I had, right, in the same way that human intelligence, it emerges from within a particular taskscape, is there a risk that we're essentializing rhetorician?
Yeah.
And how do we avoid that? And one of my instincts was, well, we don't just give them a, like, the task isn't just here's a thing, tell us what you think, but do we give them more, like, how much of a taskscape do we need beyond just here's an article,
What are your thoughts?
here's the prompt, right? Does it need to be, I don't know, right? And maybe that's something we're not worried about, because we could also make the claim that essentializing rhetoricians is not the same move as essentializing humans, because rhetorician is to already, there's already an artifice we're pulling from, so
Hmm.
we're essentializing, we're, in other words, the move we're making is not here's what human beings know. I think saying here's what rhetoricians can do, there's a sense in which those aren't equivalent moves, because we're identifying rhetorician itself as a taskscape, right? People who are
Hmm.
already in a particular taskscape. So that's how I talk myself out of that. That I don't think that.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting, yeah, it's like, or even rather than saying, like, here's what rhetoricians say, it's like, here's what the act of doing rhetoric produces in this scenario.
Yeah, I think that's more like what we're, right. What is rhetoric itself as an artifice bring to bear, and we're identifying people
Who will do it?
who will do it from within that artifice. So I think that already, I think, mitigates against my worry that, not even a worry. It was just like, well, are we now just? And then I thought, well, not really. So, but
Yeah.
but again, it goes back to your question of how how ornate this taskscape is. How many levels do we want? What's the ask then relative to that?
Yeah. And so, like, I was thinking, we give them, the respondents, a choice of cases. They choose one
Yeah,
of however many we decide. And then there are some prompts, and I haven't articulated these, but like, it says ask them questions about the artifice, its grounding, its groundings, its effects, potentially, its similarities or differences to other things. Then I've got let them respond how they choose, but with some sort of limits. So I was looking at like formal responses, text, or some form of recording, audio, video recording. And then it says we can collate content, but also which cases they chose and how they responded. So
Yeah,
a layer of the piece itself is, well, a whole lot of them chose these cases, very few or nobody chose these others.
that's something.
It's a layer of analysis beyond just, well, what did folks say about this, right? It's like,
Yeah,
well, but also
I
what
think.
induced choice.
Yeah, no, I think maybe that's I think puts it better. I think what I was getting at is yeah, the layers of analysis that we'd have beyond
Right.
just they generated this analysis. But what we see as a whole is that these tended to be the kinds of pieces that people
Right.
responded to. Would we then want like a post like why'd you pick this
I
or
was right. Yeah, and potentially a reflective question,
yeah.
maybe after the other ones about like what induced you,
Yeah.
or say what you want about why you were induced to select this rather than the others.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can collate content, but also which cases they chose and how they responded. So if there was, and I didn't know about this, I was just kind of, throwing some spaghetti against the wall, but like, if people choose to respond in a textual format versus you know, I recorded my thoughts about it or whatever. Or
Oh,
should, well, that's what I was getting at is like, would it be because I was thinking about what makes this less, what's the most painless way to do this, right? So is it like, well,
yeah.
people just would have an easier time just like hitting record
Mm-hmm.
and saying, here's what I think about that versus now I feel like, because for a lot of us, it's like if you're being asked to write something, even in this scenario, it's like, well,
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring a fair amount of attention to it. So I was like, well, um, should we
And,
let them choose? It's like
and it
you can,
has and it has the added benefit of letting them speak. It has the added benefit of at least resonating with having people on to talk through stuff.
right?
Like our sort of our primary the artifice of this project is there's a lot of talking.
Well, and I wasn't sure what to do with this either, but just sort of functionally, it's like, um, again, like the choice of whether to like use a chat bot is up to them because I don't know how you'd stop it. I don't know if I'd want to stop it. But it's like if you'd prefer to just record your thoughts, maybe that is a nudge not to, because it's like, well, what am I going to do? Enter it into a chat bot and then read off what it says? Like, why would I
or
bother?
or just use a computerized.
Yeah, text to speech, which is fine. I mean, again, it's like, these are the conversations we're having related to writing education, where it's like, I'm not super comfortable trying to clamp down because it's just a fool's errand. I mean, it's like you can never squeeze tight enough. And if that's what my focus is, it's like I just need a better task than what I'm
Yeah.
asking them to do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the gist. Oh yeah, and then I put probably if this is the scenario, we'd probably want a broader net, like in terms of like, because we talked about this as well. It's like, do you single out folks and ask them, or is this like a broader thing you post on like a listserv
Yeah.
and see what happens, which is probably nothing. Uh, but then I was thinking about, yeah, it says, I say here, compensation is some form of publication credit. Because I was thinking about that. It's
Yeah.
like, but then it's like, how do I, because this is not something our field, I think, deals with a lot. I think some other fields deal with this more, but it's like, you're not a co-author, but you did contribute material to this. Like I think sometimes the sciences where you see those papers that have like 50 people on it, and it's like, well, but they're not all authors. Some of them contributed data,
Right. We
you know?
wrote it, but we got data from these 6 labs.
So I didn't know if I mean, that even might be something to ask other fields about, where it's like, how do you folks adjudicate credit? Because like, I mean, even just like departmentally, it's like we don't have categories for anything other than I was an author on this. Like, we
Right.
don't. Like even we don't even parse it as fine as are you a solo or was it a multi-authored piece? I know other folks do, but like where I am, that distinction doesn't really come up. It's like I'm an author on this piece. So we have a very coarse notion of scholarly credit.
Yeah.
I wasn't quite sure how to navigate that, where it's like you get credit as a contributor, but you're not a co-author. Or do we just chuck it and say, well, everybody's a co-author on this one, you know?
Well, I mean, for sure, I don't have a problem with that.
I don't really.
It's
I
not
don't
like
know
it's
what
not
to.
gonna. I don't think it devalues it for us. Um, and I mean, too, it depends on. I mean, I think and this is maybe just it's probably a question we both thought about, but I don't think it was just like the next steps. I mean, some of it could be like, well, this all got jumbled up together, and this piece came out. Everybody contributed something to it. We're not necessarily gonna. In other words, if we let's say we go for a broad, we send a a big everybody's welcome to contribute. It probably means that what we would do with the responses is they wouldn't necessarily be singled out, right? We'd
Right.
be dealing with the results as we did for the first two, sort of in aggregate.
In the aggregate.
And so in that sense, everybody's in there. So and then leave it up to them to articulate to their institution what that means. Ooh,
Right.
that
Yeah.
was a strong whistle.
Um, yeah, I mean, and we're semi-fortunate that it's like we're not in a position where you really have to adjudicate this, that. It's like we don't have to get into too many fights about, well, no, it's this rather than that. But I do know that it's some institutions. I mean, I know of institutions where it's like, the publications, score matters in these
Right,
kinds of things. Whereas I'm in an institution where we haven't yet. We're going. I think everyone's going in that direction,
right.
but we're not at the point yet of splitting the hair so fine where it's like, yeah, but what's the important score of the journal that you published in?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's weird in the humanities anyway. Impact factor in the humanities is weird anyway. It's kind of a
Yeah.
disciplinary heels dug in about that.
Well, and it just moves at a different pace too. I think
Yeah,
I'm always hesitant. I still want to point out, and it may be true, but we don't know it the way that we like that notion of how few articles that get published get read.
right,
What they mean by that is cited.
right,
And it presumes that everybody that's currently teaching at a university publishes, which
right,
isn't like my dad would talk about these. Like I had taught a 4.4. I read tons of stuff. I never cited it because I I wasn't expected to publish.
right, right.
So the whole notion of it hasn't been read is hasn't been cited by anyway, which could be that's not nothing, right? It could mean that anybody who's doing research hasn't cited this, which may be a bad thing, but that's not an evidence of readership. That's an evidence of citation, and the number of people who read and don't publish is bigger than most people suspect.
Well, and I mean, it is kind of interesting for me because I've now had a couple of publications on online journals that track reads.
Yeah,
And, I mean, I have works that, according to those numbers, which are not just me, going to check that it's there. I mean, I have a high number of
four
reads
times a day.
just to get those numbers up. Um, spoofing IP addresses.
I turn on your article and leave it running all day on Netflix to get the viewership numbers up.
Um, but yeah, it's like by those numbers, it's like there are a lot of reads, even on some publications that have literally zero citations according to Google Scholar, right? Where it's like,
Yeah,
now some of them are new, so they haven't had time, but it's like, well, clearly someone at least looked at it, but ended up not, citing it, which is perfectly fine. But yeah, I mean, it's like there's all kinds of deployments other than citation. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, I mean, we probably need to settle this sooner rather than later when we send
Oh
out
yeah.
the call.
Yeah.
That
We need to figure
probably
out what to
should be
do.
something we forefront. Like here's how we're handling. I mean, right? Here's how we're handling on handling credit compensation.
And part of me feels like, yeah, I mean, if you just open the doors and say, everyone's part of me thinks that would be fun just because it's like, in theory, you can end up with a paper that has, 200
That'd be
authors.
great. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
just want to see how does the infrastructure handle that? Now,
Yeah,
again, it's like,
that becomes a topography problem.
um, and again, it's like, well, in the sciences, that's not, so maybe the infrastructure can't handle it, but,
I mean,
on the humanities side,
maybe we do like a tiered, like if you do this, you will get contributor credit.
oh, yeah,
If we use it, you get authorship credit.
potentially tiering, yeah, as part of because I put in my notes, I was like, look at, because we talk about compensation in the second piece. We talk a
Hmm.
little bit about, um, composition as a rhetorical force. You know, if you want this kind of thing, incentivize it. Big
Yeah,
surprise, right?
yeah,
And so, yeah, I mean, that might actually be interesting where it's like, yeah, you're a contributor, but if we single your piece out or whatever, and,
yeah,
sinful, I mean, it's like you might also say, if you even want to put your name on this, if you want to do it anonymously.
yeah.
But yeah, we could potentially tier that out where it's like, if you contribute, you're a contributor. If your work is singled out in the piece, you're a co-author.
And I
And
think
that's,
in the and I think in the copy we write for this ad, I think we could indicate why we're doing that.
yeah.
Because my first instinct is that just looks skeezy as hell.
Well, yeah. And
And
immediately,
partially, yeah, it is. That's what we're kind of modeling.
and immediately it's like your first email will be how unethical what you're
Yeah,
doing is, because it always is, right? The first contact you get is always someone yelling at you for what you're doing.
yeah,
I mean, that was true about this project. The first thing we got was a guy yelling at us. Remember
yeah.
that?
That's
Years
right.
ago.
What was it about?
Because we were blundering into their
Oh,
environment, and he
yeah,
was like, we're really skeptical of, with good reason. I mean, he was
sure.
angry, but he had, of course, a good point.
Yeah,
I don't know what that, and this is perhaps a point in his favor. I don't know what that environment is like now, because it's like, has it been completely obliterated by the emergence of LLMs?
yeah. But
Yeah,
also
I mean, just as,
nobody misunderstands your discipline than someone worried about you misunderstanding theirs.
yeah, I mean, and then a couple other things I was looking at is, understandably, um, we've really latched on to, and I say we as like the collective, we have latched on to AI and LLMs, right? But like, in a manner of speaking, and this came up before, where you're like, how is this not just going to be another hot take on AI? And it's like, who cares? And I was
Right.
like, one thing is, probably want to ensure it's like, we really weren't looking at AI. We really haven't been
No.
looking at AI. And it's like, so even though there are a lot of really interesting things that are popping up around these things, it's like, particularly when we choose cases, it's like, what do we mean by a mechanical Turk? What are we actually wanting to,
Yeah.
how are we actually staying on course, as it were, rather than just diverting like everyone else?
Right.
into look at what AI is doing now.
Yeah, we
See?
were doing this really specific project about Amazon's Mechanical Turks, and our third piece is just a think piece about AI.
Right. Yeah, and so it's like I don't want it to be that in part, for a number of reasons,
Yeah,
including it's obsolete before it even exists.
right.
It's like Kate and I's book where every day we're like, this should have been out last year.
Yeah,
It's just getting more, and by the time it comes out, it's going to be the relevance will have passed. We anticipated it, but it's
good.
not going to look like it.
I can't wait to commission a hit job review in RSQ.
Well, hey, anyone talking about it is
That's
good.
true. That's true. Um,
That's right. I mean, my biggest scholarly claim to fame is that Bruno Latour said I was a dumbass,
yeah,
in
that's
that
not
interview.
that's not bad. Um, heat's heat. Um, but I wonder if I think what we hit on last time is it's our I think it's our method. I think it's the way that we're collecting this, maybe. I mean, I feel that that's how it carries forward from the first two pieces. Is now going back in the conversation we just had about how to construct a hit, basically.
Yeah, and I've got, let's see, just as part of these same notes, it says we're focusing on artifice. We're asking them to apply readability. And then it says first product. We're applying the lessons on hits and compensation from the second product. We're establishing a taskscape. We can retain much of the current outline setup. We're contributing reading artifice. This isn't just another hot take on AI that will be obsolete before this ever takes shape. Jeez, man.
Yeah. But I think as you pointed out, I think the return to readability and rhetorical readability is to a certain extent where we wouldn't just be generating a a take on AI. It would be a sort of, you know, because I think some of our other models, right, it would be like an octalog or a symposium about artifice as that term shows up and relates to this particular conversation about artificial intelligence. So I'm also imagining, right, like one possible benefit down the road would just be what this piece might contribute to rhetorical theory about artifice.
Hmm.
So in that sense, it really isn't about AI. It's about how the term artifice gets deployed, either ignored or embarrassingly, or right in this particular context. So it's not what rhetoricians have to say about artificial intelligence. It's about what we have to say about the term artificial in that context.
Okay.
That's what could be potentially useful to people in that context, but I think would also be of interest to the field itself in terms of, you know, in the same way that, um, I was just I was just working through a PhD student through our PhD exam list, and we've got a whole thing on the sophists, which includes um, Poulakos and Schiappa's debate about historiography, basically, right? So you could read those pieces as they're clearly talking about the sophists, but they're also having a debate about how rhetoric should do history.
Yeah.
So I think that's we'd be doing something more like that, right? Where it's not about AI, but it's about how do we read and write about AI, which strikes me as that's rhetoric's thing, right? We do discourse and artifice. So let's 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 do some discourse about the discourse of artifice, but do it in a way inspired by Turkers.
Yeah, and I mean, functionally, we wouldn't have to route through Amazon. It would just be like Qualtrics,
Yeah,
because the compensation paradigm is not payments, you know.
Right.
Yes, then the question arises of like, yeah, how do we distribute this? Is this like a mailing list thing? And yeah,
Probably. I mean, we write up some copy, make a logo.
post it, get
Uh-huh.
no responses,
Uh-huh. Panic, have a
which
whole
is
hour
fine.
long conversation that's us doubting the validity of this project, which is every other Friday.
Um,
And then, then we cold call people.
right. I was gonna say, I mean, there's a version of this where it's like, well, we just need to identify folks and see if they'll be, because I mean, like the investment is not super
Yeah.
significant, so
It's less than coming to talk to us, which I think most people have been, you
fine
know,
with.
I think as I've learned as a book review editor, turns out a really good way to get someone to review a book is email them and say, "Hey, you're really smart and given your research interests. I'd like you to review this book."
Well, we're professors because we like to profess. We like to
Yeah.
talk about ideas with other people.
Uh-huh.
I also got a couple of books here. Now, this one, I'm not sure if this one's actually going to be super useful. It's about
Oh
Amazon
yeah.
and it
I
has
I got
what?
that through our interlibrary loan.
Oh, the same book?
Yeah.
Wow. Huh. And then I got this one. It's this short book that came out. It's Heraclitus Redux.
Ooh.
It's short. It's only like 100 pages.
Hmm.
And it's fairly recent. I think it was 2020-ish, which as I'm learning means it was probably written in 2010. Um, and I was kind of interested in it because it looks at technological infrastructures. That's a sub, technological infrastructures and scientific change.
Oh man.
Um, I might,
Whoa. There's no I mean that's gonna be a library book.
oh, because is it like $100 or
Yeah.
yeah. There were these some of these I might I think I got some of these because I reviewed books for the publisher and
Ah,
that's
there
how
you go.
they're like you can pick three and so I always go through and look for the ones that are hardback $200 just because it's like well I can't get them any other way, you know what I mean?
Man, oh, there's a whole series of these books. They're collectives, or yeah, Socrates tenured. Yeah, well, okay, I have to see if I can get a hold of this one.
Um but I was gonna poke through this. I haven't had a chance yet, but I was gonna poke through this one because I thought it there were some things here that might align in terms of infrastructures.
Yeah,
It may or may not be relevant to this project, but I wanted to see.
yeah.
All right, is there anything in your notes that we didn't cover?
Not really. I mean, that was
Excuse me.
I was thinking about the kind of the layers. Um, I was thinking also about like word or time constraints. Like if we had them do summaries, would be like, or or whatever it would be, right? Like 100, 150 words or something like that. Like
Yeah.
to give them benchmarks so that they don't so that we're signaling low barrier of entry, and assuming best case scenario, we probably don't. How much shit do we want to have to wade through?
Well, and this is something we have to think about. If this is what we're asking for, how do we process this material?
Right.
And and one answer that's just staring you right in the face is AI, is have it read through these and pull out certain things, right?
Yeah.
And maybe we want to do that. Maybe we want to do that for a couple of reasons, where it's like both,
Yeah.
it's the subject, so we're doing it, and also it makes it pragmatically more expedient, which is not nothing,
Yep.
you know, but it is something, it's not determinative, but it's something we'd want to think about on the back end. Once you get this stuff back, how are you going to process it? Because that'll shape your questions.
Yeah. I was thinking both about it in terms of processing and also what are we asking from people?
I mean, I talk about that with students all the time in methods where it's like, understandably, we always go in, it's like, but I want to ask all these different kinds of questions. And I'm like, what happens when you get 300 of these back? What are you going to do
Right.
to make sense out of what you've got here?
Hmm.
You got to think of that
Are you
first.
are you happy now?
Yeah. Always so, it's always such an alien linear experience when they do questionnaires. I'm like, okay, you're going to post this, you're going to get zero replies, or you're going to get, because they just posted on their social media. It's like you're only going to get people which is fine, but realize that's a biased sample. It's like for us, it's fine,
Hmm.
but if you
Yeah.
wanted to publish this, you could not do it.
You got your three roommates and your very online aunt.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's relevant to us because it's like if we're
Yeah.
singling folks out, it's clearly a form of cherry picking, but I don't, there
Well,
may
we
be
I
no
mean in
way
the
around
sense that
that.
yeah, we are. We don't want everybody to do this task.
Yeah. And
Um,
then it's just a question of how controlled that circle is. If you post it on a listserv, it's pretty broad. If it's these are the 5 people I invited, then it's like, well, it has value, but it changes the method there. It's like, well, then this isn't a representative sample. This is a intentionally targeted.
yeah.
You're getting intentional expert opinions on something,
Yeah, so that was my like, is it 100 words? Is it 150 words?
and it's a good point.
That was one thing that we hadn't really covered.
Yeah, but that does
Yeah, I
need
also
to be
like
in
the
there,
idea of having them pick. I think that's something.
and it gives us something to analyze.
Yeah. Um,
Increasingly, the more I go in my career, at least for now, I'm always like, yeah, but when am I going to be analyzed? I mean, I was just thinking about this because I was going through my ideas file. You know this because I was
yeah.
texting you guys the weird spin out. And
Uh-huh.
I was, I mean, like more than like 9 out of 10 ideas that I have, I look at it, I'm like, this isn't a paper. This is just a thought you had.
Yeah.
It's like, that's just an interesting thought. This isn't a paper. So
No.
more and more, I'm always like, yeah, but what are you examining here?
Hmm. No, I got like 5,000 words into writing an essay about William James's radical empiricism and having to talk to your kids about Santa Claus. And I'm like, what is this? What, I got a title for it, you know. Oh
So much of
God.
this is like, I think this is just an overlong blog post,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
if that
I got
still
a
exists.
I got a lot of those. Oh man.
The good news is, though, I feel a lot less guilt about not pursuing them because a lot of times when I look at the ideas file, I'm like, but I didn't follow through on these. This has helped because I looked at it, I was like, most of these are
Yep.
unworkable in any
Yep.
form or fashion.
Yep. God. Yeah, I used to blog. My most popular blog post ever was I was just started my first job in the Winter Olympics run. I'm like, ooh, this would be to keep up over break, to keep myself writing. I did a blog post a day about the Winter Olympics. And I had a long blog post about me and how me and Dick Button were on the same page about the scoring system in figure skating.
Mm,
And it must have like, I don't know, some key words.
yeah.
I'll never,
Dick
I'll
and
never, I'll never top the numbers that post did. It's gone now, so I don't even know what it was about, but I do remember it. I looked at my little blogger could let you look at the and I was like, ooh, there's
that's
a
right.
spike. That's got that Dick Button boost.
I think Blogger's still around, believe it or not.
Yeah. Maybe I can log in.
It's a Google property.
Yeah.
All
Um,
right. Well,
well, I'll type it up. I've got some language I started about like what this email asking people to do things would be like. So
okay.
like just
Uh,
pulling from like some of our previous language about the project. Um, yeah.
I mean, and I can send you as is my way. My notes are a bullet list,
Okay.
and I'm an irredeemable list maker.
You're also
So I mean,
just generally irredeemable.
that's true. Uh, I'm the one person outside of God's forgiveness. Um, so I could send you this list, I guess.
Okay.
I think it
Yeah.
would help. I mean, or
Yeah. And any
all right,
other, animated shows you've got ideas for?
I do. I split all those lists
Sure
up
you
now so
do.
that I used to have one master list, but yeah, as I mentioned, I was like, I can't have these things mixed in with scholarship ideas, so I
Because
split all the
you
things
might
now.
get confused. I'm like, oh no, that this article I wrote was actually an idea for an animated series.
Right. Why does this have Tony Danza in it? Hmm. Because he'd be perfect. Got the first episode already drafted.
All right. Well, now that Tony Danza's got his mention,
Now this will do huge numbers.
yes.
All right. Well, I guess we can do that. Yeah, and kind
Yeah.
of start moving forward rather than circling around and around.
Yeah. I think this is something.
All right. Then we'll
Okay.
do that and we'll check back in a couple weeks.
All right. I'll see you.
All right. Take it easy.